and confirmation should be submitted to an improvement by the planning authority. Those bits I'm all happy with because the local planning authority can do any enforcement that's necessary. It's simply confirming that it's been submitted. The bit that I'm not sure about is where it says completed accurately in its entirety, because I'm not quite sure how the local planning authority can do that. Therefore, I'm worried that it's not enforceable.
I mean, so my understanding is this is the GLA's standard wording.
Fine, I come across standard wording all the time and half of it's wrong. No, not half, but there are significant difficulties, and my colleagues find the same. So that doesn't give me any comfort. Right?
No, that was the first point, and I take your point. I mean, if it read simply should be completed in line with the GLA's guidance, would that address your concern?
I think it would, because that's what 23 says. It's just after confirmation of submission should be to the GLA should be submitted to an improvement. In other words, the local planning authority is being asked to confirm following submission in writing that it has been submitted to the GLA. I think that's all fine. So if 22 was altered to reflect that, then that should be okay.
So while we're on 22, I'm sorry that I didn't bring this to your attention any sooner. It's because I only received this 5 minutes before the resumption of today. But our carbon witness has
sent yesterday morning.
Yes, our carbon witness has commented on the revised conditions. And in relation to condition 22, you see where the second sentence it says the post-construction assessment should provide an update of the information submitted at the planning submission stage. She's suggested placing at planning submission stage with prior to commencement of substructure works. And then after that sentence, inserting an additional sentence saying it should show compliance with the approved assessment and the additional carbon reduction figures subsequently agreed.
Okay,
So
it sounds like a discussion need.
I think what I'll do is I'll send these on to M&S's team because I haven't really been close to this discussion. So and my witness has only just sent this to me, so I'll forward it on to them and see what they say.
So witness happy with 23?
Happy with 23. There is also some comments on 21. This is about the whole life carbon assessment. And it's essentially making it consistent with 22 so that it reads prior to the commencement of the demolition and updated whole life carbon assessment, and then in line with the GLA's whole life carbon assessment guidance. So as per 22 essentially.
So same problem if it's altered.
Yeah.
Okay, if we move on to 30. What is this? Yeah, so this is a location for where the clock and other bits and pieces would be reinstated. I just wonder whether it needs an implementation.
It doesn't have one, so she does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, does it? No, it doesn't need one.
It doesn't need one. Thank you. So those are my only comments on the conditions as put forward. Please note I won't add the informative at the bottom. I can't remember why we don't do that, but we don't. And I did raise a matter of public access. Nothing happened about that. Whether there would be public access to the 24 hours a day.
So condition 35, so
Oh, I missed it.
right at the end.
Okay, so we're looking at between 8 in the morning and 8 at night.
Or such longer period. Once the operational hours are investigated.
Okay, sorry, Miss Matt, thank you for that. Anything else on conditions?
There's another comment from my witness, sir, but I'm happy to just deal with that outside of your own time and communicate that to M&S. But it's essentially, just to summarise, it's essentially that my witness says there should be a condition associated with the energy strategy, i.e. the first part of SI2, reductions against Part L and associated carbon offsets. It might be that she's not spotted it somewhere in the list, but again, I can communicate that to M&S.
The section 106 agreement, so it does deal with the energy strategy in relation to the performance and then the payment in line with SIT.
That would be the answer then. It's in section 106. Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. Any other procedural, administrative or housekeeping matters before we continue?
So it'd be quite useful from my perspective just to know what we're doing tomorrow in light of our discussion.
Yes, indeed. Yes, yes. Mr. Harris.
We had for members of the public watching, so we had an informal discussion between all parties as to the onward progress of the inquiry. And one of the suggestions made was that if we finish evidence today, that there was the potential for closing tomorrow. That's quite short, particularly given that we won't know what the final outcome is of the statement of common ground, and there's evidence going to be heard. But so if it would assist you, we will do all that we can on this side of the room to make sure that we get you an appropriate closing in appropriate time tomorrow. It might mean starting later. And as you said in your opening yourself, with more time and more reflection, they might be more useful, maybe even shorter. But if you want us to finish tomorrow and be of assistance to you, we can do it.
Okay. So yes, I did say that in opening, and you said it doesn't necessarily help. We then had the draft programme which set out the Friday's closing tonight, and I mistakenly took it that everyone would sign up to that. Anyway, that's what's happened. To set out the parameters, I don't want closings in writing. I want parties present. I prefer them to be in person, to be virtual. There's been considerable cooperation in this inquiry, for which I'm grateful, but there has also been things come in late. And so for that reason, I would prefer them to be in person, if possible. I mean, I'm happy to have them tomorrow. I'm happy to start later tomorrow if it helps. But Mr. Harris, I am in your hands, and if you say you're not going to be ready, it doesn't help me to have a closing that's half-baked. It doesn't help to make a mistake. So think about it. Let me know.
Yes.
Soonest.
Yes. It does depend on how far we get today and what the evidence is, and if there's anything new and anything that needs to be referred to.
Well, so perhaps no. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, I promise you, it won't be half baked. It just means it just means there'll be a lot of midnight oil being good, but that's fine. That's the job.
Wow.
So we will get back to you, and I think so. Your suggestion that we wait and see where we got to, particularly with this witness, is a good one. With respect.
Well, we're going to have a long coffee break anyway. Mr. Fraser, if at the end of that break when you've heard all the evidence in chief, Mr. you can take instructions. For domestic reasons, it would help to know whether I'm cancelling a hotel tonight or whatever. But that's not a big issue.
So just in terms of the Rule 6 parties view, I don't know what the local planning authorities say, but we would express a very, very strong preference for closing the inquiry tomorrow in terms of closings.
Does the council want to make a closing statement?
I don't think this present anyway.
Right, well, we'll review this after. Anything else before we hear the first witness? Oh, sorry, then the next one. Last witness.
The last witness, in fact.
Mr. Fraser, I'll put another presentation, so I'll just put that in.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Okay. So, so this is the next and final witness that is called by Save Britain's Heritage, Mr. Alec Forshaw, who is the gentleman to my right. And I'm going, with your leave, to take his proof of evidence and his rebuttal proof and appendices as read. And instead, because Mr. Forshaw has the privilege of being the final witness, for him to give his evidence by way of PowerPoint presentation. Everything in this presentation is evidence which is already for you. The only point I would make is that there are some photographs that were taken on the site visit, which are there as prompts for essentially Mr. Forshaw to give evidence in relation to things that you would have seen on that site. So that's the only reason that they're in the presentation.
Okay, perhaps you can highlight those as we go through, and I can say whether yes, I did notice.
Thank you very much, sir. That's helpful. So, Mr. Forshaw, what we'll just briefly do is refer to your introduction and at the beginning of your proof of evidence, where you say you are a member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation and the RTPI. You worked in the planning department of the London Borough of Islington from 1975 until 2007, initially as urban design officer, and from 1988 until your retirement in 2007 as principal conservation and design officer. You sit on Islington's design review panel. Since 2007, you've been involved in various major public inquiries, including Smithfield Market, the Liverpool Welsh Streets, Anglia Square, Custom House as a heritage and planning witness. I understand that you also want to briefly indicate to the inspector your Westminster related experience in a way that Dr. Mealy did. So over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, sir. Yes, I thought it might be useful. We heard when Dr. Mealy was giving his evidence, and actually during the site visit, about some of his involvement with various Westminster cases. So I just wanted to make you aware that I too have some experience and knowledge of Westminster. Since leaving Islington, I've been expert heritage and planning advice on several Westminster cases, which I've listed up there. The last one, the interesting case where, again, working with SAVE, we sought to protect backdrop views of the Palace of Westminster from inappropriate development on Albert Embankment. There's been two tallish towers designed incidentally by Pilbrow. That's the case where we worked in coordination with Westminster City Council. First of all, I want to deal with heritage significance, and really what I'm going to say this morning is responding to points that have been made by other witnesses and that have risen in discussions on previous days. The applicant and Westminster City Council had, I think, a quite dismissive attitude towards the heritage significance of Orchard House. We've been told repeatedly that it's not a listed building, it's not in a conservation area, and of course that is all true. But non-designated heritage assets can have, I argue, considerable heritage significance. Indeed, perhaps more so, as this slide shows, than this feature, which we walked past on our site visit. It's in North Audley Street. You can see Park House in the background. It's Grade 2 listed. It's a K6 Gilbert Scott telephone box, and it's within the conservation area. So it has, in terms of designated status, quite a lot. But I would argue that in terms of heritage significance, Orchard House has far more interest than that listed building. If we move to another case, which we've already been raised. This document was helpfully provided by M&S, and it's the Wells Streets case, which is an example of undesignated heritage assets, not recognised at all, actually, by the Liverpool City Council or the applicant. Now, this was an area of large area of many streets, housing, which were all proposed for demolition. There were permitted development rights to take this stuff down, and indeed Liverpool City Council had embarked on doing that. It had cleared some of the properties that it already owned. This is a case which SAVE took on to challenge that successfully, as it turned out. As we can see, illustration from the Historic England pamphlet. The circumstances, of course, are different here. That's all pointed out to Marks and Spencer's case, but I think the principle is the same. This was an example of humble architecture that proved to be reusable. The Secretary of State found that there was heritage interest in these buildings in this area, not just because of Ringo Starr, but because of the history of the area and their morphology and the relationship to an adjoining conservation, indeed. And there was also a reuse, sustainability issue here. Liverpool City Council had said these buildings are beyond repair, but it has been shown to be otherwise. Going back to Orchard House, far less humble architecture, argued in Wells Streets, and I think widely regarded as a handsome building. Chris Mealy, of course, has dismissed Mr. Harold Clun, His Face of London, published in 1932, but it was actually revised and updated 5 times through into the 1950s. It was something of a bestseller with quite wide popular appeal. Probably sold more copies than Pesner. There we go. Chris Mealy, Dr. Mealy, has suggested Orchard House is routine, off-the-peg architecture of virtually no interest. I would argue that the design of the building received very careful consideration by Traherne and Norman because of the presence of Selfridges next door, built about 20 years earlier. This existing elevation drawing from the applicant, I think, shows the relationship of the two buildings really quite well. There is clear synergy, and this slide perhaps illustrates that. It shows side by side on the left-hand side 3 bays of Orchard House, on the right-hand side 3 bays, typical bays of Selfridge. You can see that the rhythm, the hierarchy of architecture here is very, very similar, extraordinarily similar. The arrangement of windows, the columns. There is a difference into where the capitals are. But you can see the parapet heights line through the attic story above it. Mr. Pilbrow suggested that he thought that the Marks and Spencer's Orchard House elevation was squashed. Really understand that. If you look at Selfridges, in fact, because of the line of the land, the ground floor on the floor of Selfridges is rather squashed, because the ground floor level is considerably below pavement. Dr. Mealy suggested Orchard House is top heavy. Again, I find that hard to comprehend really, given the similarity between the two buildings. Dr. Mealy said the lack of family resemblance is profound. I don't think so. I think it's no coincidence at all that the cornice level of Orchard House and Selfridges line almost exactly. And on Orchard Street too, sir. It aligns exactly with Hesketh House, which is on the right-hand side of this image. Hesketh's house was built at the same time as Orchard House, Joseph Architects. Another building much admired by Mr. Clubb. But the relationship, I think, is clear. Now, I think the similarities between the two buildings are obvious to the man in the street, whether that be Mr. Clun or some of the third parties who've spoken and written in. Dr. Mealy has sought to downplay the written contributions of Alan Powers and Andrew Saint. Give you their CD references, so
That's all right.
but I'll leave it to you, sir, to decide whether those eminent architectural historians are misguided in what they say. I think we all acknowledge that Orchard House is deferential to Selfridges. And I think that's a very important and considered part of Traherne and Norman's design. Even the chamfered corners, I think, are part of that deference. So if you look at this view from Oxford Street, you will see that the chamfered corner successfully avoids a sharp right-angled corner that might compete with the cornice itself, which stands clear against the sky. It very much defers consciously to the muscular, square angled corner of Selfridges. Dr. Mealy said that Orchard House magnifies the brilliance of Selfridge. Yes, it does, very deliberately and successfully. Dr. Mealy's also suggested that the various alterations that have taken place to Orchard House have substantially reduced its significance. And I would argue against that. Indeed, I'd go so far as to say that if you didn't know it had been removed, looking at the building today for the first time, it wouldn't make any difference to your appreciation of the architectural quality of the building. Under cross-examination, Dr. Mealy, I think, agreed or admitted that those details, bits of sculpture, and balconies could be reinstated if it was desired. Also, one could put back more synthetic shop fronts. Turning to the staircase, which we saw on our site visit, myself for the first time. My view is it's an impressive feature of the building. It was not mentioned in Design and Access Statement or in Dr. Mealy's proof of evidence. It hadn't been seen before under by Westminster City Council, as Mr. Pennington told me on site. We noted its good condition. It's used as a staff access and an emergency escape, I think, for customers at the store. We noted the well executed heightening of the handrail to bring it up to 1.1 metre requirements. Since seeing these and the other photographs that are in my appendix to my proposal, Dr. Alan Powers has submitted an addendum to his previous written comments. CD 1117. I put it up here in red. That's the additional text that is put in. And he comments here on the quality of the design. Decorative treatment is skillful and enjoyable. The tile dado being both practical and visually pleasing in its two-tone patterning, expressing the changing levels, contrasting plain black with mottled brown tiles. Pattern is consistent with the simplified Greek decorative details of exterior, etc. The balustrade has a dynamic swing to it, suggested of the Jazz Age, so very much breaking away from the Beaux-Arts tradition of Selfridge. So this is 20 years on from Selfridges. A contrast, but a moment in time. And then at the end, he mentions various other examples which he compares it to. Some of which have actually got. There we are. Alan Powell, of course, is a real authority on this period. There was some discussion whether the staircase ran the full height. It stops at first floor level. I put this original ground floor plan in. It's from the Westminster City Council's appendices to its statement of case. And it shows that originally the staircase from first to ground floor ran around the back of the lifts, which it partly still does, although it's all been boxed in, so it's hard to know what might survive there. But the original ground floor foyer, of course, has been moved back because of the arcade and the road wire. What I did take a photograph, obviously was there, was the first floor landing. Right, again, you can see the treatment here of tiling to the walls. So we are certain that it is intact from the first floor to the fifth floor. Now, I want to move to the question of the status of the building. As I said earlier, we know that it's not a statutory listed building. It's been turned down for listing by Historic England. They have a very high threshold level for 20th century buildings. It's not in the conservation area. It is a non-designated heritage asset, as recognised now by Westminster City Council. I would argue that Orchard House would be, or should be, on a local list if Westminster City Council were to have one. And I should point out, sir, that virtually every other London borough now has one. Westminster is one of the few exceptions. The issue was raised in this background paper updated in November 2019. This is all after the process of developing the M&S scheme started in 2018. What we have here is noting that the difference between designated assets, etc., outside these areas, blah, blah, blah. It recognises non-designated assets can nonetheless be of significance to local communities to contribute, etc. going on here, we have other buildings can nonetheless be of architectural and historic interest. It may make significant contribution, etc. Now it says in 4.6 that it's recognised unlisted buildings are identified in conservation area audits, as indeed they are. They're not recognised anywhere else outside conservation areas. There's no list that I'm aware of important non-designated areas. Policy challenges. There's the challenge of ensuring that the local heritage are recognised and appropriately valued and protected. It says 5.9. This is obviously prior to the current plan. That no reference was made to the Carlton Towers shop. Notes the NPPG advice, information about non-designated heritage assets and local plans and these. Talks about the end of 5.10 consistent criteria for local lists. And improve the predictability potential. So this is really pointing out a lack up until this stage. 5.12, given the extent of designated heritage assets, this is something Mr. Goddard sort of touched on Tuesday. And I should point out that although I wasn't here on Tuesday, I have listened to the majority of it yesterday evening. 4 hours it took, so very enjoyable. Westminster's got 11,000 statues in the building. A lot of the area is covered by conservation area. They don't have a local list. It's possibly a good reason that they're so busy dealing with their statutory duties with statutory listed buildings. There's a resources. As a former conservation officer, I can attest to that. Yeah, moving on through the paper. Since preparation of the most policy changes, notes at the bottom here, however, policy on non-designated heritage assets is considered to provide sufficient detail. But what that policy says now in the city plan is that non-designated heritage assets should be conserved. It doesn't say any more than that. There's a suggestion here that criteria are needed to identify locally listed buildings. That will be considered as part of forthcoming. It hasn't been done yet, as far as I'm aware. So I think there's a gap here. This is a building somehow sort of falling through the net. I think if there was a local list, Orchard House would be on it. I think if it had been on it before 2018, it might have made some difference to the process that has happened. But we all know, though, sir, that local listing in itself gives no protection to the building at all. And what is interesting in that evidence paper is that there's no discussion really of the practicalities of how you do protect locally listed buildings. This is something that I faced in Islington. In Islington, when I became conservation officer, there was a huge local list which had been built up over 15 years by local amenity groups. What had been established was the criteria grading system. But I recognise that a lot of these buildings actually have no protection. So I extended conservation areas and designated new ones to give protection. The buildings that were grade A on the list also provided a very good basis for the updating of Islington's statutory list from 1994. It was an incredibly useful tool. In my view, there is a clear case adding Orchard House into an adjoining conservation area, that being Stratford Place. There's clear synergy with Selfridge. Selfridge was added in 1990, 32 years ago. As far as I'm aware, there's no evidence that Orchard House has been formally considered. By formally considered, an officer report for inclusion in the adjoining conservation area. The issue of conservation area boundaries isn't mentioned in the evidence topic. Moving on to legislation, which they talk about how to connect. They mention section 69. They say they comply with the legislation. Well, they do to an extent. The requirement is from time to time to review boundaries. Not constantly, from time to time, whatever that means. You can debate the 32 years from time to time. Curiously, this paragraph about legislation doesn't mention section 71, which is the duty to formulate and publish proposals for preservation and enhancement of conservation areas following their designation. Now, I'm not saying that Westminster haven't done it. We do indeed have the audits. Well, we have the directory for Mayfair, produced in 1998 by an outside consultant, and we have then the audits for Portland Estate and Stratford Place, produced in 2003-2008, respectively. I'll take those really as the compliance with section 71. Again, it's a time after the boundaries were changed. There's been some discussion about whether Oxford Street should be a designated conservation area. Some reference to it in Historic England's letter, and Dr. Meadings asked about that. I don't think it's such an illogical idea. We did exactly that in Islington with the Upper Street Conservation Area, which is a linear conservation area covering about a kilometre from the Angel to Highbury Corner. It involved rejigging the boundaries of some existing conservation areas, which was quite straightforward. And it was a very worthwhile task. Upper Street is a mixture, a great variety of buildings, like Oxford Street, not as grand. I was also involved in a cross-borough exercise to do the same, which is the Regent's Canal, which involved Camden, Islington, Hackney and Tower Hamlets, sadly not Westminster. Now, if you did this in Oxford Street, it would mean including the two buildings on the left, Portland House, see, and Neil House. Much castigated. Of course, we don't have its architect Seymour Harris present to stick up for it, and no doubt, were they here, they'd put up as good a case for their building as Mr. Kilbrown does for his. Architects do that. And I would say that the building is not a complete atrocity, an eyesore. The parapet height lines through sympathetically with its neighbours, very consistent. There's a rhythm to it, a bays, which perhaps reflects what was there before, and the doors. The brick, orange brick, you may not like that, very personal taste, but it has some synergy with the oxidised metal of Orchard House, as you can see here, sunshine. I say in my proof that it has a neutral contribution to the street. I think that's right. Negative. It's too easy to investigate. I accept that there is a variety of buildings on the street. But as I say in my proof, I think that the early to mid 20th century departments, former department stores, usually stone clad, provide a unity of scale and materials and an overall sense of dignity and tradition that is noteworthy and valuable. And so I hope as you walked up and down Oxford Street, you've seen some of those.
I certainly have. I walked the full length.
I think it's significant. The Survey of London chose Oxford Street as a subject for one of its prestigious volumes. The 20th Century Society, in its submissions to research, sort of pointed this out, this highlighted the paragraph. But it talks here about it being part of this sort of planned grand boulevard leading from Marble Arch to the city. So that's Oxford Street, New Oxford Street, High Holborn to Holborn Circus Street. So why it should be highly regarded. The shortcomings of Orchard House. Now, a lot has been talked about this yesterday, covered by Mr. Sturgis, in terms of columns and all sorts of things, loadings and floor height, etc. So I'm not going to go there, but just one point that has been raised in Mr. Kilburn's proof and also giving evidence is the issue of level access to Orchard House. Now, he said that there isn't level access to Orchard House, and let's point out on this plan there are at the moment 3 ground floor entrances into the Marks and Spencer store. There is one on the corner, which displayed corner, which indeed does have some steps. They are. And that must indeed be a barrier for somebody with a pram or a wheelchair. But just a few metres along to the west, also into Orchard House, is a completely level access. And as we know, the floor level within Marks and Spencer's, the ground floor is entirely flat. And then on Orchard Street, at the northern end of the site, there's a level access into the escalator going down to the food hall. Going west to Neil House, This is the last of the Leon House uses. It also has a level access in. Now the ground floor level here is higher, as pointed out by Mr. Kilgore, than the Marks and Spencer store. There's a very good reason for that. There's topography. The site slopes, and Mr. Kilgore is going to have to deal with that in his new scheme. So you could put a sloping floor into the ground floor. So I would say that the existing arrangement to the Marks and Spencer store is not bad, given the constraints of the sloping side. Selfridge is, of course, a phenomenal slope across that side as the land goes down to the tidal river. And the interior of Selfridge is full of steps and staircases. So too, of course, is the Pantheon store. This in, which I hope you visited, sir. This is the entrance to the food hall on Oxford Street. You go straight down a flight of steps, find an escalator, and you have to go into the store through the building. And then at the back on Great Marlborough Street, the entrance there, the southern entrance, accessible to people in Soho. You have to go up a substantial flight of steps. And then when you're up there, to get down to the basement, you've got to go down another lot of steps. So again, in comparison to other places, the Orchard House is not bad. And what we're just talking about, the Pantheon, is it's a listed building. It has got a magnificent frontage onto Oxford Street. But it wasn't all built in one piece, as Mr. Kilgore suggested. And if you read chapter 17 of the Survey of London, it will tell you the complete story. And you had phases development, this is Coleman Street, approved. It's all blanked off now. Really not very nice at all. These little recesses for unpleasantness at night and whatever. Pretty bleak. And then Great Marlborough Street. This is not a bit of 1938 architecture. It comes much later. We've got the loading bays, and then further along the pedestrian entrance into the store. Would the loss of Marks and Spencer's from Orchard House reduce its heritage significance? I pose that as a question, because I think it's been suggested. We've heard that Marks and Spencer's will leave if they don't get the planning permission to knock this building down. Well, I would say there are many examples of buildings converted to other uses that retain their historic significance. Chapels converted into houses. Communal memories are very strong, and I think the same would be here, this building. It's interesting how many old department stores in London are still known by their old names. Berry and Tom's, Barker's, John Barnes, Dillon's, Jones Brothers. They remain in the part of the memory. And of course, in terms of significance, you could perhaps argue that the best use of a historic building is what it was originally designed for. So perhaps ground floor retail with offices above it, as the building was originally designed for, it wouldn't be so bad. The threat of demolition, now this was much discussed by Mr. Goddard, what procedure might be, and he envisaged a scenario where if the Secretary of State doesn't grant consent for the scheme here, Marks and Spencer's would leave, they'd sell their outstanding lease, and a new owner would then perhaps be able to demolish the building. Well, we know from the conditions that Westminster are concerned about this issue. They don't want to see an empty site with nothing going on it. And they refer to the setting joining conservation areas and the grade 2 star listed building subdivisions. Absolutely rightly. They might also be concerned about the environmental issue of demolishing the building. We'll come to that later. What's actually involved in knocking this building down? Disturbance and disruption will cause to the area. I think, given their level of concern, there's a strong chance that if permission were refused for this scheme, Westminster would extend the conservation area. And what evidence do I have for that? A councillor turned up on the first morning and spoke. Yes, just one councillor, but we haven't heard another councillor saying, no, we wouldn't. We know that there's a new council in Westminster following the May elections. I think they're waiting to see what happens on this. It would certainly be a reasonable thing to do to extend the conservation area. Arguing that it's illogical. And they're entitled to do it without consultation. Again, I know this from personal experience. It is once having made the mistake of consulting. It's good practice to consult, but you don't have to do it. Now, I also wanted just to, while we're on the issue of heritage significance, to address the issue of less than substantial harm, because it was raised by Mr. Harris, case, which I think he's copies of. But what I've put up here is an extract of the Secretary of State's decision on the Anglia Square scheme. Now, this was a big and complicated scheme. Mr. Harris and Dr. Meany know it well. It's to do this section of it with the setting of listed buildings. There were no alterations physically at all to the listed buildings in question. But here the Secretary of State is considering the inspector's assessment and disagreeing with it. So there's probably maybe enough here for you to get the flavour of what that disagreement was. And it was over the level of harm. And what the Secretary of State has considered is that the proposal, in terms of setting, the harm caused to the designated heritage assets would be substantial. Now that is a high test. He then goes on to define that in framework terms at the upper end of less than substantial scales. Mr. Harris may whatever at the upper end of less than substantial scale. So it is possible for there to be that level of harm through setting to the significance of a listed building. And I say, sir, that the setting of Selfridge is a very, very important part of its significance. it is unchallenged. It's monumental, surrounded by buildings that are not monumental, particularly those on the opposite side of Oxford Street. Its setting is, I think, crucial to its significance. I mean, as Mr. Harris put it, I think, very well in paragraph 109 of his opening, the building has presence and swagger. Now, you only get presence and swagger if it has that dominance. Rather crudely, how many bullets can you have in the same room? The views of the Selfridge building from the Orchard Street corner, particularly important. It's really the best view of Selfridge's. That's because the streets are wider there. Orchard Street is wider than Duke Street, eastern end of Selfridge. And where the buildings align, Orchard House, as you know, steps back from Selfridge's, where when you go eastwards, the building line steps forward. So Selfridge's looks prominent in those views. I'd like to move now to the design of the scheme and how that evolved. This is from Mr. Pilbrown's proof of evidence, where he helpfully sets out the different stages that it went through. And it started with quite a tall building. Presumably Mr. Pilbrown's idea, and presumably at the first meeting he spoke strongly in favour of it to Westminster Council officers. And considered that it would fit in well with its context. In fact, the tall element persisted for quite a few stages, as we can see down the left-hand side. But then the top right-hand side one is the suggested massing by Westminster City Council, August 2020. And this shows a 5-storey building with 3 stories set back. Those have been illustrated on the right-hand side by Mr. Pilbrown, and that's an interpretation of which one might discuss about how those 3 stories, setback stories, are made. But it's the scale of development, the height of the development, 5 plus 3. What we have before us is 6 plus 4. So the parameters that were set by Westminster Conservation Officers have not followed, been exceeded. The canopy, or the cornice to the scheme, it's nearly 5 metres higher in the Selfridge cornice. I measured it up the other day with Mr. Pilbrown's assistant, as he requested us to do. In my view, it's an excessively dominant, unremitting, continuous element of the design. This is the view, existing view up Orchard Street from the site inspection view booklet. Existing, proposed. Here we can see the impact of the cornice. Now, Mr. Pilbrown has said correctly that it doesn't oversail the boundaries of the site. Well, that's when you're walking along as a pedestrian, you don't know the boundaries of the site here are. What it certainly does is oversail the building line. I think that's what matters. The building line was set back, the clefts on both elevations, or Oxford and Orchard, have these long displays. It's a departure, I think, significantly from the historic building line of Oxford Street, which is entirely orthogonal. Happens in right hand zone, except of course for Oxford Circus, which is in itself a monumental piece of architecture. So the proposals, I think, are sort of worrying, a departure from established building line. Completely unnecessary, I think, in order to identify where the way into a building is. You can see that from Selfridges. It has a canopy at the entrance. Features on this front elevation. It doesn't slip down. Something I also wanted to just mention was going back is that, of course, the east side of Orchard Street, Selfridges, is broken up into separate elements. As it is on Duke Street. We saw this again on our site visits, a comparatively short return of Selfridge on Duke Street and Orchard Street, exactly equivalent to Orchard House. And then beyond here, we've got Chipperfield's interventions, extremely subservient, of course, to Selfridge. There it is looking back. You can see how Chipperfield has set his new rates down. That's what I call deferential architecture by a very skilled architect. This is an existing view of Marks and Spencer site on Orchard Street. Hesketh House here on the right-hand side. The 1970s extension, and then Orchard House beyond. And you can see how Orchard House exactly matches the corner of the original Selfridges building opposite it. And here we have the proposal. Altogether different scale, higher than Selfridge. You can see that quite clearly here. Timber cornice. It's a massive element in the townscape. Some of the other views that we looked at, which where the scale, I think, is a serious issue. This is in the Portland conservation area. Portland view south. We have on the right the 3 tons pub, an historic pub. It's not a listed building. There's some discussion of that on the site visit, but it's a non-designated heritage asset that is identified in the audit, not on the map. Beyond it, we've got a restaurant on the ground floor, and then we've got early 21st century building, brick, very, very contextual, replacing some previous Muse buildings. Very sympathetic, I think, to the 3 tons pub. And beyond that, we have the applications, the brown brick, building bay, etc. Beyond in the distance, we can see the 1970s extension to Selfridge. Here is the proposed view. So you can see the massive change in scale. And again, the Selfridge hotel building beyond on the east side of Orchard Street. Similarly, down Granville Place, on the right-hand side, we've got all the loading bays to the house. So we'll walk past. Looks to be pleasant. And the hotel on the left-hand side. Never seen anybody coming in and out of it, but it's very quiet. The buildings on the left-hand side, again, recognised as non-designated heritage assets. in the conservation area audit. I think that the chimney pots, square chimney pots are a fine feature of the building, quite ornate. It's mentioned in PEVSA as such. And here's the proposal. Can't even get it all in. I say that is damaging, harmful to the character and appearance of the conservation. Now, turning to the bulk of the building, these clefts, these entrances, the canting, if you like, of the building, I do find the asymmetry here an odd, disturbing feature. So what this elevation shows, the true elevation of the upper floors, the 4 upper stories, the ziggurat. And I think this shows the sort of lack of cohesive design, really, overall. These top floors, well, I don't know, Babylonian, Aztecian sort of feature. Nothing really to do with the classicism, supposed classicism below. Though both Dr. Meany and I slightly struggle with the nuances of it. Whatever, I think the ziggurats are at odds. Now, if the ziggurats were invisible, and usually they're done in London to minimise visual impact from the street, and sometimes to protect daylighting to adjoining properties. But that setting back hasn't really worked here because it's going to be clearly visible in several views. We've seen some of these, and we've seen the views that have been put in by the applicant. What I say about all those sort of spot views is that they are just that, and these are continuing views as you look down the street. But here are just a few of them. View from Oxford Street. There's continuing views along the south side of Oxford Street as you walk. Particularly once you're at the main entrance to Selfridge, you will see the new M&S scheme beyond Selfridge. And the top floors, here you can see it interrupting that clear, what is today a clear cornice corner of Selfridge. One of the views from North Audley Street. Note incidentally here how Park House, which also has quite a short return to North Audley Street, nothing like the length building proposed on the application side, but it also stepped down. It's just 4 stories to the corner here. And then the roof, and we can see that on the model very clearly. Thank you for re-erecting it. Just have a look at that to confirm that. But from that 4th story, the roof then rakes back at a very, very gentle angle, so that the roof doesn't impinge on the street scene. By contrast, this is the view from further south in North Audley Street. And on the left here, we've got 2 blocks of Edwardian buildings put up by the Grosvenor Estate. The first unlisted, and then the second, north of Green Street, listed buildings, 24 to 29 North Audley Street. Park House, and then the proposed development. Dr. Meany, I think, said that the upper floors wouldn't be visible above the house. Clearly not the case. They're massively visible. And I think it's absolutely no surprise that Historic England said what they had in their consultation letter to Westminster City Council. They have identified harm here, with which I very much agree. Given the efforts that were made by Westminster City Council over the design of Park House, replacing a 16-storey tower, so considerable improvement, I'm surprised that Westminster City Council found this acceptable. Now we know that Historic England have no powers of direction over this. They're just a consultee. But they're very important consultee. They are the heritage experts for London. Them rather than the GLA, I should point out. Now I want to move on to the issues of CAS, economic growth, all the sort of good things the applicant says the scheme is going to produce. And I think I will probably be criticised for not setting out in full all the CAS policies in my proof of evidence. But I think I do cover the issues that are important. And I think the first thing I should say is that if there were no heritage or sustainability or design concerns with this proposal, then the proposed scheme does indeed provide things that comply with and contribute to CAS objectives. We acknowledge the scheme would contribute, but as you heard extensively yesterday from Mr. Sturgis, we think that a retrofit scheme could do a lot of that as well. This is an extract from the Westminster City Plan, which is talking about need for office space as an area. This was gone over, I think, 2 days ago, Mr. Goddard, and what the minimum target is now 445,000 square metres during the plan period, which goes up to 2040, a long time away. What Mr. Sturgis was, I think, saying was that in a retrofit, you might have 10,000 square metres of retail, and with the extensions that he's proposing, about 40,000 square metres of office. So quite a substantial contribution to targets. We know also from Mr. Goddard's appendix that there are other schemes in Oxford Street, 3 former department stores, Debenhams, House of Fraser, John Lewis, where I think you add those up, 87,000 square metres of office floor space. Essentially retail space is no longer needed, and some extensions to the existing buildings. What I'm saying is that I don't think we have to have such a huge amount of offices as is being proposed in order to contribute towards the CAS objectives. There are other opportunities, perhaps, for office even closer to the application site. When we were on the site visit on that terrace on Orchard Street, admiring the plastic plants, the Marks and Spencer store manager pointed out the building opposite this building, which is the former Selfridge Hotel. It's been empty, he said, since 2008. Now, we know that Westminster Council don't want residential There's enough hotel space. What they want is offices. So here's an office development site. Sawbridge, I think, is what you own, so I'm not sure what they're doing by yet. It's really tiny. This hasn't really mentioned anybody as far as I've seen. Talking about other potential uses as well. And does the scheme have to be offices in terms of contributing towards CAS? Or maybe it doesn't. CAS allows for the opportunity for other things to happen, particularly entertainment, an important part of drawing people in to the central London area. And I put this, referring to this submission, it's in my appendix, but also there's a, it's been put in greater detail by the architects. And it's a scheme in Edinburgh, converting a former department store into a visitor experience. Johnny Walker.
I think I've been to all the sites that have been suggested to me to date. I haven't been to this one now. I think to Edinburgh frequently, and I don't intend.
No, I don't think you need it. So there's enough in the evidence that you've given, I think, to explain what the scheme's about. I just put it in as an example of the Elizabeth line. Has been raised as a great boon to the area, and I indeed it should be. It's not a particularly close walk to the application site. I think Marble Arch is still closer, but it should be a fillip for the western section of Oxford Street. But of course, these infrastructure projects, including public transport, are a two-way process. They help people in and out, and it will undoubtedly help other centres like Stratford, Paddington, Canary Wharf, King's Cross. There are many areas where office development is going to be attractive because of the Elizabeth line. The London plan or spatial development strategy that recognises the need for densification in suburbs and other centres. There's no particular reason why every international headquarters needs to go to the western end of Oxford Street. And look at Google going to King's Cross. The people who really do want to cram into the centre of London, because they're tourists, they are often coming for the heritage experience of central London. Heritage has to be an integral part of the success of the CAS. The scheme proposed clearly provides good retail accommodation. We're not exactly sure how much. I think the minimum set down by Westminster is 5,322 square metres, including back of house. The existing, of course, is 19,500 square metres plus ancillary space. So whichever way you cut it, it's going to be a significant loss of retail space. Okay, it's going to be more efficient than what's there at the moment. That wouldn't be hard. But potentially, the retail, if it is just 5,322, the minimum required, that is 8% of the total floor space of the development. So offices for doing it. There is I think, discussion with Mr. Goddard about the plans of Marks and Spencers. I'm not particularly clear whether, if they get their consent, they will find a relocation site somewhere nearby during the 3 or 4 years of construction process in order to maintain a presence in this part of Oxford Street. I don't know that. In the meantime, I'm presuming the Pantheon, even though it is smaller than the existing store, it has a similar range, not exactly the same, except it's similar range to the existing Orchard House. Presumably that would be the temporary flagship, or has the flagship already moved to Westfield? I don't know. I'm not sure how many flagships you have in a fleet. Is this a London flagship or an Oxford Street flagship? Anyway, it's one of those words, a bit like gateways. Shouldn't get too much. We heard, well, I heard some interesting discussion with Mr. Goddard about what's wrong with the western part of Oxford Street. And there's some interesting stuff here in the Nash Bond appendix to Mr. Goddard's proof. Evidence of the lower footfall. We know that the Pantheon, despite its drawbacks, significant drawbacks, and we all agree, it is resilient. And I think Mr. Goddard suggested it's doing quite well because of its clientele, a different, as Mr. Nash Bond suggests, paragraph 8.3, demographic makeup, footfall. Now, Mr. Goddard suggested that I think the Pantheon enjoys a more sort of local community clientele. And I think that's very largely due to the fantastic improvement there has been to Soho and Fitzrovia as a desirable place to live and work. The SME, the creative industries that have moved in, replacing all the sleeves that was there before. It's perhaps because of that that the eastern section of Oxford Street is doing better. So what's the demography at the western end of Oxford Street? Well, it's interesting. I think Mr. Harris has talked about the street having a smell. Well, there is a smell of diesel, I accept that. But there is clearly lower footfall. And I think if you look at the hinterland of the western end of Oxford Street, it's very quiet. A lot of the residential north of Oxford Street is partially occupied. And we know it's a centre of the Middle Eastern community. They often only come to London in the hottest months when it's unbearable in Dubai or Saudi. They're around these huge family entourages in July and August, racing around in their gold-plated Lamborghinis, irritating everybody. But then they're gone. So there is a sort of potential, and I think probably Marks and Spencer's has been suffering from that. And this development, proposed development, isn't going to change that. What possibly Westminster City Council needs to think about is what sort of mix of uses does it need in this area in order to revive this bit of Oxford Street. put this slide up in terms of the potential impact of the development itself on the prosperity of the area. We've heard that if Marks and Spencers go, it's terminal for this section west of Orchard Street, although Primark might. But it's certainly, if the building is knocked down and redevelopment, we're talking about a huge amount of construction traffic and all the pollution and danger and noise that involves. We're talking about quite a long period of time. I know that Selfridges have recently written in favour of the scheme, and I wonder whether they looked quite carefully at this. Perhaps they did, but they're certainly going to be aware of the development. I want to talk a bit about the proposals on Orchard Street, because you want to have a break?
Not yet, but you're nearly at the end of your.
A little bit more, maybe possibly half an hour.
In which case we ought to have a break. I hoped that we'd have covered all your elements in chief before the break.
Well, I can carry on and do it quickly if you prefer, but that would be more efficient.
Highly much use of it. If we are going to close tomorrow, the earlier we finish today, the better, as I would say. But if people want a break, then
Well, no, it was a question of whether you will have satisfied yourself whether there's any new points.
I've looked through and there have been some new points. I'm not going to take any point on those. I think Learned Friend is the person who needs the longer break.
Yeah.
So if we're going to have a longer break, and I notice there are 5 slides to go, I'd be suggesting that we should progress on.
Be about half an hour, yeah. Okay,
Absolutely.
5 slides hopefully won't take.
Okay, well, we've been told that you can't keep Orchard House and carry out.
Did you tell me your favourite picture for? Well, Adolf is doing them now, so.
Thank you.
I didn't think I did anything.
We've been told that you can't carry out the proposed road improvements and provide a decent, satisfactory pavement beyond the columns of the house. On the right is the 1973 road, 4 lanes of traffic. It's 17 metres distance between the outer column of Orchard House and the frontage of Selfridges, 17 metres. This 1973 scheme, C, has a pavement on the east side, outside Selfridges, parallel to its frontage, 3.5 metres wide. The carriageway is 30 metres, and that left just a half a metre outside the column of Orchard House, which is why the arcade was put in. You will understand that. This is a blow up of that, so you can see it slightly more clearly.
Okay.
All lanes of traffic. What I say is that what has happened since then is shown on the existing plan. The eastern pavement has been widened by 2 metres outside Selfridges, even though there's no entrance into Selfridges there. So what we have now, today, the 5.5 metre wide pavement outside Selfridges. A 10 metre carriageway, so 11 metre carriageway and a half a metre still on Orchard House side. What I say is that you could go back, you could provide a scheme here that would give you 3.5 metres outside Orchard House, 3.5 metres outside Selfridges, and a 10-metre carriageway. It's pretty obvious to me. If you wanted to improve the pedestrian experience even more, you might even reduce the lanes to 2. But that's down to our engineers. The ambitions for calming traffic. Arcades are not intrinsically bad. It's quite a nice one at the Ritz. It's illustrated by one of the. So you could keep it or not. You might use the arcade to provide a ramp to deal with those steps at the corner. And then you've still got your 3.5 metre wide pavement beyond. So I think there's a solution there. It doesn't rely on the redevelopment scheme. We were asked to walk through Selfridges, this route, proposed route from St Crispin's Place to the new public realm, and we did that. And this is the what we go into. See the quite limited water ceiling height in the Selfridge Blue Pool. It's full of people having a nice time, emptying their wallets. There's a ferocious, a steep flight of stairs down to deal with the level difference. So it's not an easy level access route through. And then eventually we arrive at St Crispin's Place. Now I would argue this is a completely different sort of public realm than could ever be achieved in the new proposed pocket park, whatever you like to call it. And there are reasons for that. There's a human scale here. The old buildings, the height of them, the variety of buildings. The choice of eateries here is immense. That's what people like. Along James Street, there are dozens and dozens of restaurants and cafes, bars. This actually is a bit of Soho. This is a highly successful place. People flock here. And of course you get sunshine too because of the scale of the buildings. Looking at the model, sir, you will see just what a sort of goldfish bowl being proposed pocket park. I think the dimensions are something like 14 metres by 10 metres, but the scale of the buildings, the elevations abutting it are 40 metres high. Successful public places have a relationship building heights and space. Roof gardens. A roof garden could be provided on the existing Orchard House. This is a very nice postcard put in Westminster City Council's appendices. The Selfridge roof garden. I've never been up there myself, but this is a lovely image. I don't know if they still like that today. And just in the background, you can see Orchard House. Without all the clutter on top of it, you can see that. And views beyond towards Marble Arch. So public improvements can be, public realm greening can be done on an existing building as well as a new one. And then just finally, I wanted to comment on our enjoyable site visit to Kensington, sir. And we enjoyed Mr. Pilbrow's presentation. This was a retrofit. The scale, we can see it's 5 stories. Recladding in Roman brick. You can see the relationship here to the listed department store in the left, clearly subservient. The scheme has an extension which mends the historic building line to the side street, with the opposite of what it's doing at Orchard Street and Oxford Street, where it was going against the existing building. Inside, we saw spaces which had revealed existing columns, deep floor plan, openable windows, things that seemed to me could be done in a house. There was, interestingly, he said, I think that the boots on the ground floor were able to continue operating while all the building work went on. Something worth thinking about. And a pedestrian arcade was there. We saw that going from the station concourse through to the side street. Office frontage on one side and the back of the shop on the other. Weren't many people around, but it's a convenient route for residents getting to the tube station. But not much more. Certainly wasn't the Burlington Arcade. Quite similar, I think, to what might be being proposed. And going back to the public realm proposed there, I think the council needs to think quite seriously about Granville Place as a route through. The pub and restaurant important use. Their future is the Pret a Manger that we visited, have a cup of tea. I think the public realm strategy is much glammed up in the proposal, but there are other things to think about. All those loading bays on Granville Place. Where does Granville Place go anywhere? It's Portland New South connects through to Bryanston Street and the Commons. So finally, this is my final slide. It's from the background paper. It's really just a summary. I think a very useful one. The reuse of historic buildings can also help fight against climate change. A sustainable future will need to find ways to reuse and generate existing buildings. That's extremely well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forshaw. So we'll adjourn now for half an hour until 12.
So just to confirm, I'm going to ask Mr. Porter any questions, but there is the section of his proof, section 9 on sustainability policies, section 10 is the overall planning balance, but I don't think I need to continue with any further questions on that.